There are tons of common household installations you can do yourself if you know how. So stick around, because this week on Today's Homeowner, we're going to remove the mystery and share some tips and techniques that'll make those improvements a breeze. Hey, welcome to the show this week. You know, one of the things about being a homeowner is so many times you'll be watching television or walking down the aisles of the home center and you'll see something that would be just perfect if it was installed at your home. Well, so many times homeowners will stop short on a project like this because they're just unsure of exactly what's involved in the installation. And even if you had the budget to hire a pro, where are you going to find someone that'll seal a garage floor like this one? Well, this week we'll be looking at a number of very common do-it-yourself installations and giving you all the information that you need to make the right decision and the right selections. Now, speaking of sealing a garage floor like this, just recently a couple of my guys took care of completely revitalizing this floor, and it was somewhat of a textbook approach to improving the look of your garage floor. The first and most obvious step is removing everything from the floor itself. So this is really best done in conjunction with a cleaning day, or better yet, before you ever even move into the house. We found an epoxy coating kit at the home center that's designed just for garages, but doesn't work very well if you apply it over other sealers. So if you think your floor may have been sealed before, test it with water and see if the water beads up. Now, after a good sweeping, you'll need to remove any residue from oil spots. Unless they're brand new, most all garage floors have at least one or two of these. Mineral spirits and a stiff brush work well to loosen up the goo on the surface so you can soak up the oil with a rag or paper towels. In order for the epoxy to bond properly, the floor must be completely clean. So this manufacturer provides a mildly acidic cleaner in their kit, which you mix with water to prep the floor. Because it is acidic, a long-handled scrub brush is a good idea. Then you rinse the entire floor down thoroughly with clean water. We used a squeegee to get all the excess water out of the garage and to really speed up the drying process. This is also a good time to fill in any little small crack that you may have in your slab so that they won't be obvious in the finished floor. Concrete repair caulk works well for this, but you'll want to be sure that it and the floor are completely dry before applying the sealer. Because this sealer is epoxy, it's a little different than ordinary paint in that you have to mix two different parts together before you use it. Then, depending on the temperature, it may have to sit for a few minutes before you apply it. But once it's ready, you better be ready too, because after it's activated, there's a limited window of time in which the epoxy can be used. If the weather is warm, you may have as little as an hour before the coating becomes unusable, so no coffee breaks during this job. Work steadily, completing one 4-foot by 4-foot area at a time, always keeping a wet edge. After the coating is complete, you'll want to let it dry at least overnight before you allow any foot traffic in your garage, and at least 3 to 4 days of drying time before you bring the minivan in. Now, the big advantage of sealing a garage floor is it makes it so much easier to keep clean. When you break out the broom, it just sweeps a whole lot easier. And this particular coating had a little bag of confetti in it that we were able to sprinkle over the top of the finished coating, and it gives it a nice finished appearance, and it'll really hide the dirt. Now, our next installation is outside at the house next door, where my buddy Alan Lyle's in the process of installing a new security light. Now, anything electrical, you may want to hire an electrician to take care of that work for you, because it's kind of intimidating to a lot of people, but this particular installation is fairly easy.
Oh, this is probably what you'd call a classic example of a do-it-yourself project. We just want to take this existing floodlight, we're going to put in this motion sensor halogen, and I'll be honest with you, we could hire an electrician to do this, but it's going to cost us anywhere from $80 to upwards to $120 or so just to put in this $24 fixture. It's easy though, we're going to do it ourselves.
And the very first thing you do, of course, anytime you're working with anything electrical, is to turn the power off. We turn the light on at the switch, then instead of yelling back and forth, I go to the breaker box with my cell phone while Alan watches the light. Once the power to the circuit is safely off, Alan begins removing the old fixture. Then he adds a bracket to the box to accommodate the center mounting point of the new fixture. The wiring itself is as simple as connecting black to black, white to white, and ground wire to ground wire. And most outdoor fixtures have a gasket at the base, so be sure that's fit in place properly so that no moisture can get inside the box.
Now once the light fixture is installed, you'll want to take the manufacturer's booklet to set the sensitivity and of course how long the light stays on.
Hey, we have a lot more tips coming up, but first, Joe has a great tip on how to deal with a stubborn carriage bolt.
The do-it-yourselfer's best friend for joining wood to wood is the carriage bolt. Unlike a lag screw that only goes into the wood, a carriage bolt passes completely through the wood and is secured with a washer and a nut. Now the one disadvantage to a carriage bolt is that when you drop it in the hole, it does have a tendency to spin on occasion when you're trying to tighten a nut. And the reason that happens is on the underside of the head, you'll notice it has a square shoulder. And if that shoulder doesn't fit tightly in the hole, it'll spin as you're trying to tighten the nut. So here's a trick that'll prevent that from happening. Before setting the bolt in the hole, take 3 or 4 finishing nails. These are galvanized nails. And insert them around the shaft of the bolt as you slip it into the hole. And you want to space the nails evenly around the bolt. And then tap it in. And what you'll find is that the nails will act, you can actually hear it, will act as shims and will tighten it up. And look at that, it's as tight as a drum. Now you just slip it into the hole and put the washer and a nut on the other side.
Hey, this week we're looking at a number of very common do-it-yourself installations. And if you live in a house built maybe back in the 50s, you probably have a pair of these type of doors maybe in one of your bedrooms. It's a bypass or sliding closet door. And one of the problems a lot of people have with this type of door is you try to open it and jumps right off the track. That can be extremely frustrating, and once you get it open, the other problem is you only have access to half the closet. You have to almost get a workout to see what's in the other side of the closet. Well, a very easy solution to something like this is to simply replace these doors with a bifold closet door. That allows you to stand in the middle of the door, open it completely open, see everything you have in there, and installing a bifold closet door is fairly easy, but the challenge with working on any older house is finding the door that'll fit exactly in the opening. So our first step here is to remove the old door and get an accurate measurement of the opening so that we can find one that size, or in this case, slightly larger. To get it down to size, Alan has to shave the outer edge of each door with a power planer until the width is just right. Then he covers the recessed track for the old bypass door with a piece of wood trim to create a little header so that he can attach the surface mount track for the new bifold door. The lower pivot points for the door must be directly below this track, so Alan uses the old plumb bob to locate exactly where they need to be. Then, when the bracket is secure, he sets the door in the lower pivot point and snaps the guide on top of the door into the upper pivot.
And I think that's going to do it. Oh, yes, operates smoothly. Danny mentioned earlier about those pivot points. Keep those in mind because if you ever need to adjust your door, particularly to the right, to the left, you do that by adjusting it on those pivot points. It'll get loose over time too. Up top, it's really easy to get to. You've got one screw right there. Loosen it a little bit, you can pull it out, push it in, tighten it back, works great. We do want to make sure it is flush. It's more than flush, it's fairly tight all the way down, looks good. One thing I will say though, some doors, they tend to be flared out at the bottom because they're not installed just right. With your door, you'll get this hardware. These little wings actually fit on the very back of the door so that when the door closes, they interlock just like that, and that keeps the door tight together. Now, even though the manufacturer recommends you put them on, I'll be honest, I rarely do because they just get in my way. All that's left now, finish coat. Now the homeowner hadn't decided though if they're going to paint it or if they're going to stain it. Either way though, it'll look great. Hey, speaking of finishes, that opens up a whole new can of worms, especially if you're dealing with an entry door.
Boy, that'll certainly improve the function of that closet with the bifold doors that Alan installed. But sometimes installations will just make something look a lot better. And you can see this door needs a little help. A lot of sun damage, all the hardware's all tarnished. So we're going to improve the appearance of this door by installing a brand new door knocker, new hardware, and everybody likes a nice brand new kick plate. But before we can install anything, we got to do something to the finish of this door. So we're going to remove it from its hinges. We're going going to completely strip all the existing finish away from it by sanding and a little bit of elbow grease, then restain, reseal, then we can install all the hardware that'll make a big difference. Fortunately, Alan made it over from the other project to help me get this off the hinges.
I thought you already had it on.
Oh, come on, give me a hand here.
This kind of work is much easier to do when the door is horizontal, and since there's a storm door here, it's really not inconvenient to remove the door. Now you'll want to put some padding on top of your sawhorses so that you don't scratch it. When the old hardware is gone, the sanding begins. Now we're starting with an 80 grit sandpaper because this door is so rough, but after we knock down some of the grain, we'll go to something a little finer. A coat of stain followed by 2 coats of polyurethane, and the wood door looks almost new. The new kick plate and knocker go on while the door is on the sawhorses so that we can lay them out real carefully, but we put the door back on the hinges to set the lock set and the deadbolt so that we can get to both sides of the door at the same time. Thread the screws into the new hardware very carefully so that you don't strip them, and if you use a cordless drill, go real slow so that you don't scratch up that new hardware or the door itself.
Man, that little bit of money and time made a big difference on that door. How much money did you end up spending on everything?
Well, when you look at the stain, finish, of course all the hardware, your door, handset, knocker, the kick plate down here, about $120.
That's not bad.
Not bad at all, but the smartest money we spent was about $5 extra. While we were at the home center, I went ahead and had them key this lock to match the existing key for all the locks in the house.
And it makes it a lot more convenient than having a lot of keys to deal with. Hey, coming up, we're going to show you another very common do-it-yourself installation, removing an existing shower head and replacing it. And Emily has a suggestion on one that will allow you to save a little money on water.
These days you're seeing more and more green products on the shelves at the home center. And here's one that's really easy to put to work. This shower head is part of a line of water amplifying shower heads from Delta that uses a technology called H2O kinetics. Now, as you know, water conserving shower heads, they've been around for a long time, but let's face it, no one wanted to use them because most of them sacrificed a great shower in order to reduce the volume of water used. But this shower head is different because while it does conserve water, it also changes the shape and the velocity of the spray. That means that you get the sensation of more water than you're actually using. It's also designed to produce larger individual water droplets so that each drop retains more of its heat. This means it stays warmer longer. So now you can have a shower that's exactly the same temperature that it used to be, but uses less hot water than ever before. Now, there are 4 models in this line, and the most efficient of them uses only 1.6 gallons of water per minute. That's a water savings of about 36% without having to wake up to a weak shower every morning. What a great way to start your day.
This week we're looking at a number of do-it-yourself friendly installations. You know those things you see at the home center that you'd love to have at your house? Well, one of those things that a lot of homeowners are thinking of changing is their shower head. And we're about to change this old one out for the same water conserving model that Emily showed us a little bit earlier. Now, no matter if you're upgrading or you have a broken shower head, the first thing you have to do is remove the old one.
And the best tool to do that is a strap wrench like this one, because there's no chance of scratching the finish like you would if you use pliers. You know, even wrapping a rag around a fixture won't guarantee a scratch-free job. Before the new shower head goes on, a lap or 2 of Teflon tape is suggested to be sure that the fixture won't leak. Now, while I test this out, Alan's getting started on a tile setting job.
Well, Alan, this will be an easy one. Not a very large area to deal with here.
No, this will be a cinch to do. And typically, you and I would come in here and pop a chalk line right down the center here, pop a chalk line center here, and that little X marks the spot. That's going to be the starting of our tile. We're not going to do that. We're going to do something, we'll just say it's easier because I like it easy on me. What we're going to do, it's a closet, let's face it. So instead of putting it right down the center, making it look symmetrical, I'm going to start on one wall and put only on one side a cut tile. The reason why, the clothes are going to hang right over here. You're not going to see a cut tile on this side of the wall.
And that'll save a lot of materials as well as a lot of time, because like Alan said, ordinarily you would divide everything up and have a cut piece on each side of the wall. And this kind of idea may come in handy if you have a particular kind of bathroom that you want to line up on one wall and move over and hide the cut piece, maybe under a vanity, something like that. But this should work out great, especially with clothes here.
I think it will. What I do want to do though is go ahead and pop a line on this one.
Hey, where's my knee pads?
While Alan begins mixing up the thin set adhesive that we'll use to glue the tiles in place, I begin laying out and making all those cuts we talked about for the right side of the closet. If you're only making straight cuts like we are here, a scoring cutter will do the job. Now, if you have more complex interior cuts, you may want to spring for a day's rental on a wet saw. Back inside, Alan begins putting down the thin set with a notch trowel. And this is a key step because if you get the hang of spreading this stuff, you can lay tile. The notches also ensure that the thin set is a consistent depth all over the floor so that when the tiles are pressed down, the individual ridges of thin set compress and spread out evenly. A level set across the top of the tiles guarantees that the surfaces are level and rubber spaces placed between them keep grout lines a consistent size. Now, speaking of the grout, that comes after the tiles have set overnight to dry completely. A rubber grout float is the tool for this job, and you drag it across the floor, pulling the grout so that you can press down into the grooves without snagging anywhere on the edges. When the grout starts to set up, it's time to clean off all the excess with a sponge and a bucket of clean water. If you're doing a larger area, you'll need to empty your bucket a few times and get clean water to be sure you remove all of the grout haze from the surface of the tiles.
Now, Alan, I know you'll agree that a successful ceramic job is really depending upon that perfect cut.
I would agree to that. Fortunately, I was able to make it work anyway, though. You keep practicing. This was an easy installation because we put the ceramic tile directly to a concrete slab. Now, you may not have that. House may be up on piers. If you've got a wood floor system, don't put that tile down on the wood. You need to put down one layer of cement and backer board first.
You know, a question that we get all the time when we're dealing with ceramic is whether or not you need to put shoe molding around the perimeter of the room. Well, you can if you want to. It's more of a personal preference, but here our ceramic fit perfectly right under the baseboard. We really didn't need it at all.
Now, one other question you may ask yourself is, do I need to seal the grout? Certainly if it's a high traffic area, particularly if it's around a lot of moisture, such as kitchens, bathrooms, or even the foyer.
Hey, if you have any kind of question at all about your house and about improving your house, we hope you'll send it in, just like this viewer did.
Hey Danny, I was just wondering, what would you consider to be the most practical tools to have around the house?
That's a tough one there, Lisa. Boy, if I had my way, I'd have every tool ever made, but most homeowners just really don't need that much. First of all, a basic toolkit is a must for all those little projects around the house. My suggestion for hand tools that should be included in that kit are a tape measure, hammer, a screwdriver with a number of interchangeable bits, regular pliers, as well as adjustable pliers and needle nose pliers, adjustable wrench, torpedo level, a small saw, cordless screwdriver, safety glasses, earplugs, dust mask, scissors, gloves, and the old reliable putty knife. Now, the other tools that you might use a lot but won't fit in a toolbox include a good ladder, a combination battery charger and tire inflator, a fire extinguisher, and a couple good flashlights. One other thing I would consider is a water cutoff tool in case you ever have to cut the water off at the meter. Now, plan on spending about $300 or $400 for these basic tools. Boy, we covered a lot of ground today, and maybe it'll make you look at things a little bit different when you head out to the home center and see something you want installed in your house. Now, of course, it's very important that you read all of the directions and instructions that are provided by the manufacturer. Whether you're a pro or think you are, it's well worth the time to see exactly how it should be installed. And if you run into a situation where you need a helping hand, then recruit a neighbor or one of your friends to help you out so that the job goes just a little smoother. Now, speaking of jobs going a little smoother, you'll also find from time to time that a little specialty tool may make the job a little easier. Well, instead of spending $50 or $100 for that tool that you may only use once or twice a year, then consider renting it for $10 or $15 a day from the rental center. And more than anything, make sure you allow enough time to do the project right. That way, you won't be redoing it again.